In glittering, skyscraper-studded Eastbrook, there's a story people still whisper over late-night whiskeys. It isn't just about power and money colliding. It's a cautionary tale of love, betrayal, and the long, bruised climb towards self-redemption. The leading players are Mason, sole heir to the Sterling dynasty, and Skye, the self-made CEO who once owned his heart and then slowly gave it away. Everyone in Eastbrook knows the name Mason. He's the prince who was supposed to sit on the throne built by 3 generations of real estate barons. The face that launches 1,000 gossip site slideshows. Yet the only woman who ever made him feel free is Skye, the fighter who turned a dorm room side hustle into a Fortune 500-bound startup. Her grit and independence slipped past his armor like spring water through stone. They met at a charity gala. Skye had just stepped off the stage after a keynote that was half TED Talk, half revival meeting. Mason stood in the back row, instantly hooked. That night the moon hung low over Eastbrook, silvering the sidewalk as they walked home. Mason stopped under a street lamp. "Skye, I'll walk away from every last share of Sterling stock if that's what it takes to be with you." Tears glittered in her eyes, because she knew he wasn't bargaining, he was promising, and he delivered. The next morning he faxed the family lawyers a letter of renunciation, so polite it could have been engraved. Together they launched a tech meets sustainability startup, pouring Mason's trust fund payout into code and clean energy patents. Within 18 months venture capitalists were throwing term sheets at them like confetti. They worked out of a loft that smelled of espresso and solder, slept on a mattress on the floor, and made love under string lights that looked like captive galaxies. Mason believed, really believed, that if he kept choosing her, she would keep choosing him. Then Evan came home. Evan, her first crush. The boy who used to race her down maple-lined block after block in Riverdale. The one who left for Stanford and never wrote. He stepped off the jet bridge looking like a travel magazine spread. Camel coat, easy grin, the past wearing a cologne of what-ifs. At first Skye kept her distance, texting Mason screenshots of Evan's dinner invitations with laughing emojis. But Evan knew the old passwords, the song they'd choreographed a playground dance to, the way she liked her coffee at 13, the scar on her knee shaped like Orion. She started coming home later, then not at all, her phone face down on the kitchen island. Mason's questions bouncing off the silence like dull arrows. Each unanswered call, each cancelled breakfast, sliced another thin layer off his heart. He told himself patience. Patience. Love is patience. One Thursday night he cooked her favorite saffron risotto. It hardened to yellow concrete in the pot. At 2:17 a.m. she tiptoed in, Evan's bergamot still on her collar, and Mason felt the last-stitch snap. He didn't yell, he just went quietly to the guest room, opened the cedar chest, and began packing. When Skye found the signed divorce papers the next afternoon, her nerves misfired into sarcasm. "Leaving so soon, Sterling. You won't last a quarter without my spreadsheets." Mason zipped the duffel, looked her straight in the eye, and, for the first time, felt nothing twist inside his chest. "You wanted moonlight, Skye. I'm giving you the whole sky." He closed the door with a click soft enough to sound final. Back inside the marble foyer of the Sterling Tower, the family board expected the prodigal son to crawl. Instead Mason walked into the emergency session, asked for the worst division, the overseas portfolio bleeding red, and promised to turn it black within a year. While Skye learned that Evan's real hobby was marrying founders and flipping their companies, Mason drank terrible instant coffee in Jakarta airports, rescued factories, fired embezzling cousins, and hired kids who coded circles around the old guard. 12 months later the same directors who'd sneered handed him the chairmanship with the same hands they'd once counted him out. Somewhere between the hostile takeover he blocked and the all-night negotiations that saved 5,000 jobs, Wendy appeared, daughter of the Sterling Foundation's longtime auditor, fluent in sign language and bad puns. The first person to laugh at Mason's gallows humor since Skye. Their first date was vending machine sandwiches in a hospital corridor during a charity board meeting. Their second was a sunrise hot air balloon flight she won at another charity auction. She kissed him at altitude, her hair whipping across his face like a promise he hadn't dared phrase. Meanwhile Skye's private investigator handed her a folder thick with Evan's shell corporations. The man who quoted Rilke to her over small batch gin had already filed paperwork to merge her startup into a holding company registered in Grand Cayman. She confronted him on a rain-lashed balcony. He shrugged, said valuation was valuation, and asked if they could still travel together to Capri for optics. That night she fired him from her life the way she fired underperforming interns, swiftly, brutally. No letter of recommendation. The papers called it a hostile unwind. She called it self-surgery without anesthesia. The epilogue writes itself in quiet scenes. Mason and Wendy marry in the Sterling Road rose garden under a tent strung with Edison bulbs. They adopt a rescue mutt who sleeps on the ottoman and fart in Dolby. Skye throws herself into a foundation that teaches teenage girls to solder circuit boards. She wins humanitarian awards and still wakes at 3 a.m. to check stock futures. On sleepless nights she scrolls through old photos of saffron risotto, deletes them, restores them, deletes again. Eventually she stops. Sometimes, at gallery openings or airport lounges, their paths still cross. Mason nods. Skye smiles, small, genuine, the kind that doesn't ask for anything back. They have both learned the same lesson. Love is not a notary public stamping forever on a dotted line. It's the daily choice to stay, and the grace to step aside when staying becomes a lie. Off the coast of Eastbrook, the moon keeps its monthly appointments. Wax, full, wane, gone. It neither apologizes nor explains. And somehow that is comfort enough. Skye watches it from her office window. Mason from the balcony of the high-rise he no longer hates. Wendy from the hammock beside him. 3 separate viewpoints. One indifferent satellite. A silent reminder that every orbit eventually curves toward daylight. And so the legend mutates into something less dramatic and more useful. A reminder that choosing the white moon over the steady sun might buy a moment of silver glamour, but the sun still rises, whether you're standing in its light or not. Skye, a girl from an ordinary family, carved out her own legend with grit and brains. In the Shark Tank of Eastbrook Venture Capital she rose to CEO, before 30, stunning, independent, unbreakable. The night Mason first saw her she was pitching to a room full of sneering suits, calmly eviscerating every objection with a smile. Something in him snapped to attention. She looked like the moon sliding out of clouds, illuminating every romantic notion he'd ever pretended not to have. They fell fast and hard, as if gravity had been invented just for them. Mason fought the Sterling dynasty for her, threatened to walk from the billions, from the boardroom throne, from the very name, until the family finally yielded. Their wedding filled a cathedral of glass. They vowed forever while cameras whirred and the city held its breath. For one perfect afternoon even the traffic lights seemed to flutter in celebration. Marriage, however, refused to stay cinematic. Mason discovered he could own the headlines, the penthouse, the ring on her finger, yet never quite possessed the part of Skye that stayed up until 3 debugging cap tables. Skye's company devoured her the way a bonfire devours oxygen. Mason's texts went unanswered, his birthdays rescheduled, his insomnia politely ignored, and somewhere between cancelled dinners and strategic planning retreats, Mason lost the last map to who he had been before the sterling crest became his skin. He began to miss the version of himself who could vanish on a motorcycle for weeks, accountable to no quarterly report. Then came the afternoon he ducked into a co-working loft to surprise her with orchids and instead saw Skye laughing at something a slick Goldman type whispered in her ear, their knees touching beneath reclaimed wood table. A private language written in glances. The flowers hit the trash like damp fireworks. Mason told himself it was nothing. Told himself again at 2 a.m. while scrolling through her encrypted calendar entries. Told himself one last time when the private investigators folder landed like a coffin lid. Betrayal scalded. Yet the quieter ache was the realization that the grand love story he'd bankrupted himself to write now felt like homework he was tired of grading. He started therapy. Started running at dawn. Started rereading dog-eared Kerouac while the markets opened without him. One April dawn he understood he had never once chosen his own life. Every fork had been prestiged by sterling expectations. The epiphany felt like oxygen after drowning. He drafted the divorce petition himself, word by meticulous word, the way a lawyer might draft his own will. Skye fought harder for the company than for the marriage. Negotiations stretched across 6 climate-controlled conference rooms and a 40-page settlement, but Mason held the line. He wanted nothing except his Ducati, his guitars, and the right to disappear. When the judge stamped the decree he walked out into sunlight so bright it felt like permission. He left Eastbrook the same hour, rented a studio above a used bookstore in a coastal town whose name he couldn't pronounce, and learned how to make pour-over coffee for strangers who never asked for his net worth. He slept on a futon, binge-watched title charts, joined a bar band that played for beer and fish tacos. For the first time since prep school lacrosse, no one in the room cared what his surname was. The absence of that weight felt like flight. 3 years later a venture capital summit lured him back to Eastbrook for 48 hours. He wore a thrift store blazer and arrived on a borrowed bicycle. In the grand ballroom he spotted Skye across a swarm of laney-necked entrepreneurs. She looked smaller, softer around the eyes, as if the armor had been traded for skin. They drifted toward one another like satellites remembering an old orbit. Walk? She asked. Walk, he agreed. Outside, autumn air polished the waterfront. They spoke of term sheets and tide pools, of failure and fermentation, of the marriages they had both failed to sustain. Skye admitted she had confused net worth with self-worth. Mason confessed he once thought freedom meant escape, but found it meant authorship. They laughed, really laughed, until the ferry sounded its midnight horn. Then they hugged, cheek to cheek. Two exiles who had finally negotiated peace with their former kingdoms. No promises, no nostalgia, only the mutual recognition that the moon can light a path without asking anyone to follow it forever. And under the humming marquee lights they parted, lighter, lonelier, and strangely complete, in the same glittering city, inside a cantilevered villa that hovered above the river like a UFO of privilege. Another story cracked open. Lynn, a CEO of Aurora Analytics, queen of Series B warfare, was reviewing slide decks when her phone pulsed. Lynn, I'm back. Can we meet? The sender was Miles, Harvard rowing team. Gap-toothed grin. The boy who once carved her initials into a cherry tree and then vanished to London with only a post-it. Goodbye. The message detonated 17 years of carefully curated amnesia. She stared until the screen timed out, then stared some more. Finally she texted an address. They met at an all-night cafe where the espresso steamed like industrial smoke. Miles wore time like an old sweater, still broad-shouldered, still devastatingly sure of welcome. I never stopped thinking about you, he said. His voice had acquired a British polish. Vowels round as river stones. Lynn stirred her coffee until the whirlpool blurred. We're different people now, but the feeling isn't different. Give us one more chance. She meant to refuse, meant to walk out, meant to stay the woman who sent quarterly updates to investors at 3 a.m. Instead, she heard herself whisper, okay. The word fell between them like a key. When she got home, Shawn was asleep on the sofa. Laptop open to her calendar. Screensaver cycling photos of their first startup office. 2 kids with 1 ramen bowl and a dream. Guilt gutted her, but desire had already boarded the elevator. Morning broke ugly. She told him everything, voice trembling, eyes dry. Shawn didn't yell. He just nodded as if confirming a terminal diagnosis. He packed in silence. 2 duffels, the vintage guitar she gave him for their 5th anniversary, a box of cereal. At the door he kissed her forehead like a brother signing off at the airport. Be happy, he said. Then he was gone, leaving only the cereal dust on the counter. Shawn drove until the city thinned into Pine Barrens. Only then did he call his mother. I'm coming home. Home was Riverdale, stone mansions wrapped in ivy, dinner tables that demanded bloodlines. The Hawthorne dynasty greeted their prodigal son with curated relief, no lectures, only Michelin-starred soup and whispered logistics. Within a week the elders produced a shortlist of suitable alliance candidates, each bio glossier than the last. Shawn flipped through photos without seeing them until a candid stopped him. Chloe yachting off Nantucket, hair whipping like a battle standard, smile sharp enough to cut carbon fiber. Something in him exhaled. Her, he said. The wedding resembled a state funeral for his freedom. Riverdale's cathedral overflowed with senators, oligarchs, and one bewildered aunt who still thought he'd marry the ramen girl. Shawn stood at the altar in a hand-stitched tuxedo, expression so neutral it could have been painted on. Chloe appeared in a silk gown that poured like liquid moonlight. She took his sweaty hand and squeezed once, an understated mercy that almost made him cry. When the bishop pronounced them, applause detonated like cannon volley. Photographers captured the kiss. 2 beautiful people, perfectly aligned, perfectly strange. At the reception Shawn drank enough champagne to levitate, but never enough to forget that love and obligation can wear the same face, and only time would tell which one he had married. One afternoon, by pure chance, Lynn overheard that the arranged alliance between Shawn and Wendy had been finalized. In that instant it felt as though a sledgehammer had slammed into her chest, pain spreading until she could barely breathe. Only then did she admit the truth she had dodged for years. The man she actually loved was Shawn, not the long-gone white moonlight who lived only in her memories. But the clock could not be turned back. All she could do was offer a silent prayer that Shawn and Wendy would find every happiness. Time galloped ahead like a white pony glimpsed through a crack in the wall. In the blink of an eye several years slipped by. Shawn and Wendy now had a son and a daughter, their home bright with laughter and the busy joy of a family that worked. Lynn, meanwhile, poured every waking hour into her startup, turning herself into a tougher, richer, more formidable CEO, yet the regret and self-reproach lodged inside her refused to fade. They were ink on parchment that no solvent could lift. On a sun-drenched afternoon, she sat alone on the terrace that crowned her company's tower, gazing at the distant glass cliffs of downtown and the silver river of traffic flowing beneath them. Scenes from her days with Shawn, tenderness, quarrels, reckless hopes, flickered across her mind like an old movie reel. She let out a soft sigh and whispered, Shawn, be happy. At that precise moment Shawn was strolling through Riverside Park. Wendy's hand anchored in his. Sunlight painted matching smiles on their faces. And for them the world had dialed itself down to hush. They both understood that whatever scars the past had left, only the present and the future counted. They would protect what they had, side by side, and keep writing the story that belonged to the two of them alone, far above, in the boundless expanse of celestial, Starfields glittered and iridescent mists drifted between sapphire pinnacles. This was the god's own cloister, removed from the dust and noise of mortals. Yet one immortal named Caleb nursed a secret craving amid the splendor. Endless centuries of solitude had wearied him. He hungered to taste human love and grief, to feel the short, fierce blaze of a mortal life. One day, while the Celestials' attention wandered, Caleb quietly activated the gate between heaven and earth, the ancient portal called Azure, and stepped through, determined to find the love fate owed him. On Earth, late afternoon Riverdale roared with life, horns, billboards, smells of coffee, and exhaust. Caleb took the shape of a gentle-eyed young man and wandered the crowded avenues, curiosity thrumming in his chest. Suddenly a robbery shattered the routine of the street. A female officer named Leah sprinted forward, subdued the gunman with crisp strikes, and shielded a cluster of shoppers before backup arrived. Leah, steel on the outside, quiet warmth within, caught and held Caleb's gaze. To him she looked like a shaft of light knifing through cloud cover, landing exactly where his heart had gone dark. He began to cross her path by design, lending her the effortless insight of an immortal and the patience of a man in no hurry. Slowly, he stepped into her life. At first she kept her guard high. Outsiders with perfect manners usually had hidden angles, but day after day he proved himself. He fixed a flat tire in the rain, showed up with coffee during a late stakeout, quoted Neruda when her nerves frayed. Trust crept in, then fondness, then something brighter. Their feelings unfolded the way spring leaves open and small, almost shy, and suddenly vivid. Just when Caleb resolved to tell Leah who he truly was and invite her to share eternity, thunder cracked over their sky. Mason, the man who had long lived in Leah's memory as her untouchable white moonlight, came back to Riverdale. Mason's return tilted Leah's world off its axis. Years had not dulled her ache for him. Distance had only distilled it. She found herself torn between two gravitational fields, the grounded, blossoming love she shared with Caleb and the old, intoxicating orbit of Mason. Sleep fled, appetite vanished, and the easy clarity that had guided her since academy days dissolved in a haze of what-ifs. Spinning in that emotional eddy, Leah made choices her badge should have forbidden. She leaked confidential intel so Mason could dodge an investigation, and on one midnight raid she hesitated for a split second, long enough for a suspect's bullet to punch through her abdomen and snuff out the baby she and Caleb had only just begun to dream about. When the doctors pronounced the fetal heartbeat gone, something inside her cracked past the point of repair. Caleb arrived too late to stop the tragedy. Rage and grief braided inside him. He could not fathom how their careful future had been traded for a ghost from yesterday. In a blind fury he drew on celestial power and hurled a bolt of justice at Mason. The ex-lover hit the pavement, alive but scarred for life. Only after the echo faded did Caleb realize he had stained his own hands with vengeance. A breach of every vow he had sworn as an immortal. Leah watched Caleb cross that line for her sake, and her heart turned to ash. She understood she had broken what was brightest between them, and she refused to hide behind excuses. The next morning she walked into internal affairs, confessed every compromise, and asked to be cuffed. The judge sentenced her to prison, the clang of the gate sealing off the world she had known. Behind bars the months stretched into years. Leah rose before dawn to scrub floors, led literacy classes at night, and wrote letters she never mailed, each one an apology to a child who would never read. She looked for Caleb in every visiting room, but the chair opposite her always stayed empty. Eventually she stopped expecting him, yet she kept whispering her remorse to the unyielding concrete. One winter evening she stood at a corridor window, forehead against the chilled glass. The city's glow could not drown the stars above them. In the hush she heard, or dreamed she heard, Caleb's voice drifting down the light years. Leah, I forgive you, but our story has closed its book. I'm returning to Celestial to mend what I broke. Walk free when you can, and find a mortal happiness that doesn't carry my shadow. Tears blurred the constellations. She knew she would never again feel his hand in hers, yet the words loosened something knotted inside her. Love, she finally understood, is not a chain. It is the courage to wish the other well and let go. When her release came, she would start over, piece by piece, guarding the fragile good she still could serve. Caleb ascended the unseen staircase home, Leah's name a quiet ember in his chest. What they had shared was brief, but it had scorched his understanding of time and longing. He folded the memory, tucked it beneath centuries of starlight, and walked on through the endless halls of Celestial, seeking the path that would lead his soul back to balance, and perhaps, in some distant age, to wonder once again.